We want this to be a conversation again as much as possible. So welcome to the second installment of the quarterly forum for MEP 2040. If you weren't here a few minutes ago, Andrew mentioned that we had 176 people register for this, which is twice as many as our first forum. So we're very excited to have many of you on board. Andrew will be previewing the numbers right now for participants. I think that's almost doubled as well. So we're very excited to have you all here. So the agenda for today is that we will be doing a brief introduction to MEP 2040, recognizing that some of you may not have been here for the last quarterly forum, which was in March. We'll be going over the signatories, new participants, our new webpage, which is broken off from the Carbon Leadership Forum hosted site right now. Then we'll be going into working group updates. So many of you may be a part of working groups. If you're not, please go ahead and sign up. We will have a mechanism for you to do that as well, or go ahead and throw that in the chat if you'd like to be a part of one. So we'll be giving updates. Kim will kick us off with his wizard hat and all of his knowledge of all the working groups. And then we're going to go right into manufacturers and EPDs, data analysis and reporting, partnerships, and communications, which are 4 working groups right now. So I'm going to hand this over to Andrew, who is going to walk us through our welcome and general updates.
Great. So what I want to do actually is, as I talk for just a minute here, I want to show you all the brand new website, which just went live this morning. And virtually all of the content on this new website has been pulled from the CLF, the landing page for MEP 2040 on the CLF website. So it's a relatively easy thing to do. But hold on just a second and I'll share the screen. And so you can start looking at it. The URL is mep2040.org. And as you all know, I think the MEP 2040 challenge began as a conversation among a few CLF members together with Kate Simonin, our founder and executive director. And at a high level, it states that all systems engineers shall advocate for and achieve net zero carbon in their projects, operational by 2030 and embodied carbon by 2040. And the commitment in response to that initial call was created by the MEP 2040 steering committee, which came together as a group of volunteers. And it's about very, very specifically 4 things. So we want to be very crystal clear and practical about what we're asking people to commit to. First, establish a company plan, request low GWP refrigerants, request EPDs from manufacturers, and finally, participate in forums like this one. And so you can see all of the current signatures, the signatories to the challenge, or to the commitment rather, on the homepage of the new website. And then there are, I think, 43 of those signatories, and you ought to be able to see your company's logo there. And then supporters are non-MEP organizations that are also signing in to signal their support. And that's I think there are 24 organizations that are signaling their support. So that's mainly what I had to say. It'll be great to get your feedback and ideas going forward for new things to be added to the website. And especially, probably the most important page on the website is going to be resources. And so we have a relatively small but very valuable set of initial resources that we published for organizations learning how to, or thinking about how to do a company plan, understanding the role of refrigerants more deeply, and then what are successful strategies for requesting EPDs from manufacturers. And sometime in the next few days, we'll have a form that people will be able to fill out when they go to the website to say, I've got a resource that I think would be appropriate and helpful for the commitment. And here it is. It'll be, this initiative is a crowdsourced initiative led by and governed by and participated in by a whole lot of valuable volunteers. So the resources are going to be coming from all of you as you learn and do. And Kaylee, maybe that's about all I need to say right now.
Great. Thank you, Andrew. Go ahead and share my screen again. All right, so for anyone who was not here last time, might be worth it for us to just briefly go through this. I know that Andrew briefly showed that on the website as well, but the 4 tenets of this challenge right now, and we're understanding that this is an evolving science for all of us. So right now it's establishing a company plan to reduce your embodied and operational carbon with the goal of that happening by 2040, as is in the name. Requesting low GWP refrigerants. That is a topic of many of the working groups. So you'll see that come up quite often. Requesting EPDs. We're going to go through that first in the working groups, and then participating in this forum in particular, and then also participating in those working groups. So again, if you'd like to get involved, please just raise a hand. Signatories, Andrew got the number right. It's 43 and 23 right now in terms of signatories and supporters. And again, we have that very clear line between your signatory, you must do MEP based work. And then if you're a supporter, it's anyone else in the AEC industry. And then we just showed the website. So we're going to go ahead and move on to our working group updates. Kim, I will hand off to you. And I figured you could start off with the concept of participation in the working groups.
Thank you very much, Kaylee. What we've done is take the approach of, if you're going to eat an elephant, you need to break him up into very small bites. So we've basically got 4 elegant elephant eating tables and many elephant eaters at each of those tables, and they sort of align with the 4 major pillars of the challenge. As we kind of alluded to early on, this forum is actually one of the 4 pillars of the challenge, and it's more or less the responsibility of our communications and resources working group. And you'll be hearing from them a little bit later, but this is sort of our ability to connect with our community and to, in as much as possible, create this 2-way street of communications between the challenge and the people who are participating in the challenge. And a great step forward was the creation of our very own website, and a place where all our members and the whole world can go to access these crowdsourced open source resources that will help all of us achieve our goal of net zero operational carbon by 2030 and net zero embodied carbon, whole building carbon by 2040. The other groups are actually the data analysis and reporting group is the one most closely associated with the first pillar, to establish a company plan and report on your progress toward your goals in that plan. The next group is our manufacturers and EPD group, and they're most closely associated with the requesting material transparency information from our manufacturing community. There's a real crossover between the data analysis and reporting group and the manufacturers and EPD group, and that is over the subject of lower global warming potential refrigerants, because it's actually part of how systems work together, and they have emissions of their very own, as well as the ones associated with the operating efficiency of our systems. It's an interesting crossover between that, and we'll actually talk about some of the work that's been going on there. Our 4th working group that's not clearly represented in the 4 pillars is our partnerships working group, and this is a group that is actually looking to establish connections with other like-minded organizations in this carbon reduction space, this climate action space, to help us with getting our message out and to bring those resources to bear in the work that we're trying to do going forward. So let's turn it over to the working groups and let them tell you what we've been doing in the last 3 months since we got together at the very first forum back in March.
Thanks, Kim. I'm going to hand over to Adam and Christy to go over the manufacturers and EPD groups progress.
Thanks. Yeah, I'll kick things off here for us here. So yeah, our working group here is really focused on communication with manufacturers and both owners. Our biggest charge here is if we don't get data flowing in a meaningful way, all this great action that we want to take downstream to quantify and understand and reduce the carbon is going to be hard to get at. And the data for this is very complicated in a lot of ways. So breaking that down and making sure we're all on the same page is one of our primary goals. So we're here in the third slot here requesting EPDs for MEP system components. And as Christy will get into, that's a very loaded topic, and that's a very vigorous debate in the working group, EPDs versus these other frameworks, which she'll get onto there. But I think that's a really important part of our action right now that we'll talk about here. We're gonna go to the next slide there. So, oh, Christy, I'll take it over to you.
Thanks, Adam. Yes, so one of our main charges to request EPDs, discuss with manufacturers how to request EPDs on MEP equipment and what equipment we really need to see EPDs on. And as Adam alluded to, the data right now is very spotty on MEP equipment when it comes to environmental product declarations. So some of the conversations that we've been having internally, we want to help provide guidance and a framework to manufacturers on, what equipment are the critical pieces of equipment to have EPDs on, where to spend the time, where maybe not to spend the time so much. And really what the conversation has been broken down into is energy using equipment and non-energy using equipment. Because we know that the operational carbon for the energy using equipment will likely far exceed the carbon emissions over the embodied carbon of the equipment. And so as a first step in that process, we're looking to compile the EPDs that exist already that are current for MEP equipment. And just that in itself is a collaboration with the data group that Kim or one of the other members will discuss soon. But we need to know what's out there so we don't overlap with any requests that we make on the EPD side. The other topic of conversation has been the use of SIBC's TM65 tool, which is a tool that you can use online to calculate the embodied carbon of MEP equipment. And so for the energy using equipment, because we know operational carbon is the big piece of the pie for those items, or likely the big piece of the pie, is TM65 enough to use to calculate the embodied carbon of the energy using MEP equipment? And if it applies in some places, but doesn't apply in others, where's that tipping point? And then the third topic of conversation has really been to reframe the conversation and talk whole carbon life cycle, as opposed to breaking it out into embodied carbon, operational carbon, because what ends up happening is we'll focus on one topic and get lost, the other topics will get lost. So we need to make sure that the considerations are all based around this whole carbon life cycle. So that would be embodied carbon, operational carbon. And I like to break out refrigerants, even though refrigerants does get captured in embodied or operational, depending on who's having the conversation. Sometimes we forget to talk about refrigerants. And so we're talking about how to break those out and have the separate conversation on refrigerants, which the data group has been doing a great job on. Adam?
Yeah, and just a couple comments on the previous two. So a couple of developments since the last quarterly forum. We now have a EPD provider within our working group. So that gives us really nice, better understanding of what that process is and why it's important or why it's not important. So that's been good. We also recently had a manufacturer that's joined the group too. So we're getting the opinion from the manufacturer side on that. And, you know, in some cases from a manufacturer's perspective, it's, you know, that's great. You engineers can pelt me for EPDs all day, but I've got 90,000 things on my line card. What do you want me to give you first? And by the way, those all have costs, right? So those are very real discussion points. And if we can get another manufacturer or two in the working group, that would be great. In addition to EPD providers. So I think I'm not going to say those are two opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of, I think everyone wants to get towards that common goal. So it's just an interesting dialogue. So if you're really into that dialogue, joining the working group is a great way to get in the middle of that. It's been interesting too, as we've had different groups that have come into the working group, different individuals at different meetings, and everyone's coming in like, yes, I just got to get an EPD on everything because I got to get the data, and that we just got to move through that. And other people are saying, you know, all I need is a material breakdown, and that gives me enough to get started. So it's a big topic, but hopefully what we can do is, and sort of this, I guess, dovetailing into this next one too, with these forums, hopefully by towards the middle of this year, we kind of have a decision on what we want for each equipment. We can start communicating that out. But there's just, you know, necessary communication first. So the second subgroup here that we're focused on is we want to give manufacturers and owners room to talk and give their opinions as well. So we felt that kind of breaking out dedicated forums separate from this meeting might be a good way to do that. Also separate from the working group, because working group's kind of you're in that commitment for the working group piece, but we want to get a broader list of thoughts and opinions from the different communities and have some debate on that. So what we want to do is set up two or three forums here in 2022 to have that discussion. As we mentioned, it is a big investment for manufacturers, so the clarity is really important. So our goal is by late summer that we'll do a what and why on MEP embodied carbon, just to kind of set the stage for those that don't. And now that the website is launched, under resources, there is a link to it's a webinar we did about 1.5 years ago called Inviting MEP to the Embodied Carbon Party. This is a good webinar. It is about an hour, so it is longer, but it's really good as an introduction. So if within your own firm, people, you know, I know even in my firm, there's still a lot of education that we need to get out to just introduce why do we even care about MEP embodied carbon. So that webinar itself is a good one to send within your own firm or within your own companies or to manufacturers you're working with, just so they can start to understand what that is. We're going to do a kind of a retake of that with what we've learned since for this first forum in late summer. And then in late fall, come back with an idea on what Christy had talked about, some more clarity around that, probably pushing out some specification language that we can start to use in our specs, and then start to talk about a timeline for these data requests and start getting that data flowing. And then forum 3 is just, we'll figure that out based on what we need. And this is a shout out too, if organizing a forum, which isn't a lot of work, but it's just a lot of getting people around the table for these kind of discussions. If you're passionate about that, I'd love to find a lead for this subgroup. So please join us. I'm gonna help. And then the final one here, Adrian and Chris were not able to attend today, so I'm going to cover for them really quickly, but that outbound communication timeline needs its own dedicated focus. So they're leading a sub-working group focused on getting that timeline out there. How do we want to communicate it? Who needs to hear it? And where is all this data going to go? So working with the DAR group, which we'll hear from in a little bit, which is a good crossover collaboration point that we'll be working on to make sure that all this is happening in a reasonable way. So I think I'll pause there. I think, Kaylee, do we want to have any sub discussion now, or we kind of want to go through and then have discussion at the end?
I think we have time after every working group presentation. So if anyone has questions right now on this working group for manufacturers and EPDs, anything you've heard so far that you may have questions about or thoughts, please feel free to add that into the chat.
I just want to point out that one of the many incarnations of Luke Leong has asked if we might consider a representative from AHRI, since they represent most of the HVAC and plumbing manufacturers.
Yeah, well, one of the many forms of Luke. That's great. We have been in touch with AHRI, and they're very interested in how they can participate too, because you know, apples to apples comparison of data is going to be critical down the road as well. So I think that is really important, and I think getting AHRI into this working group is probably a really nice way to make sure that that's included. So I think that's a great comment.
So this is Kent Peterson. I'm the one that actually wrote it. For some reason, Luke's name is showing up on mine, but I spoke at AHRI meeting, their member meeting last month in Washington, DC, and talked a lot about APDs and the need for the manufacturers to start looking at this. Some of the feedback that I received from the manufacturers there was that it roughly is $10,000 to get an APD. So this is like, where do we prioritize this money? What do we do? In some cases, you know, some of my advice is maybe start to understand what is your embodied carbon footprint on that product, and start to think about before you go out like Daikin and do thousands of EPDs, you might want to think about what it is you can do in your manufacturing process to reduce the embodied footprint before you actually spend the $10,000 per product to do this. And I just think an open conversation with some of the AHRI people and these larger manufacturers will help greatly in moving the needle and not just going through a process of $10,000 certification per product.
Yeah, Scott, thanks for that. I think that's, you know, that's spot on with the conversations we've been hearing as well. And I think that's part of why this looking at TM65 material breakdowns is something we are strongly considering as well, because some equipment, it's less than 0.1% of the carbon, right, is the making of it versus the operating piece too. So that matters too. And yeah, I think we've had some initial discussion with Bill McQuaid, and I think using AHRI helpful to get folks' attention, also hopefully even bring audience to these different forums that we're having, so that everyone's on the same page too and feels like they have a voice. So that's great.
That topic, are manufacturers open to producing or at least doing a preliminary set of TM65 breakdowns?
From what I was hearing from the people attending the session that I ran, definitely some of the major international manufacturers are extremely interested in understanding how to attack this and how to do it the right way. So I think that the more we can engage them in this discussion, at least they can start to plan corporate-wise on what they need to be doing. And when I say the international, I mean, they're already dealing with products in Europe and other locations where some of these same requirements are starting to play out.
Yeah. Scott, is there any one or two folks you could maybe refer to us that we can get them looped in a little bit? Because I think getting the right people that have some of that experience and that background would be great to have them in our discussions. Adam, was that intended for me? Oh, did I say the wrong name? You're still Luke on my screen.
He's still Kent. Yes.
Yeah, I'm actually. I think because Luke forwarded me the invite to this meeting, I'm showing up as Luke. But
yeah, Kent. Sorry.
Yeah, I'd be happy to Adam to help try and get some people together, and I've been working closely with Bill McQuaid on a lot of this stuff too. So, okay. But there were some key manufacturers I think that might be very interested in having an open discussion as they start to plan out what they need to do.
Okay, Christy, does that sound like a good approach to you? I know you're kind of spearheading that part.
Sure.
So I should coordinate with you, Christy.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Start with me, and then we'll roll it out to the group.
I'll reach out to you separately. Thanks.
Okay, I'll drop my email address in the chat.
We've got a little conversation going on in the chat box about the relative impact of operational efficiency in embodied carbon. Would somebody on the call like to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'll defer to Kaylee on our timing because every time we bring that up, it turns into about 30 minutes of back and forth
Yeah.
to it. It's absolutely the reason. That's what we need in the working group. That's the dialogue we're having too. So I guess Kaylee, I'll let you facilitate how you think we need to on that.
I mean, that's going to come up again in the data analysis and reporting group. I think that's something that we're really interested in looking into more closely. As Lyle said in the chat, who's in the DAR working group, as the grid gets cleaner, the operational portion becomes less significant and the embodied portion goes up. So I think we do need to keep that all in perspective. Embodied carbon matters and it's going to matter more. So I think keeping it in perspective as we're asking for things like TM65 methods and traditional EPDs they're still very relevant, even though it might not be as proportionally significant as structures, which is almost all embodied. I think just making sure that we're continuing to press on the EPD front, because it does take multiple years to produce an EPD, right? You're going all the way back to the raw materials. So
yeah, yes. And just to clarify, I think our conversation in the EPD group has more been it has never been to negate any data or set aside something that seems insignificant right now. It's more, what's the most efficient way, the fastest way, most efficient, or maybe most productive way to gather the data to understand, because right now there's even a shortage of data to understand those specific kind of key points. That 0.1% that Adam referenced, that was from a chiller EPD that Train did years ago. That's expired now, right? So the data is very sparse. And so the conversation is always this data must be produced. It's just how do we produce it? What's the most efficient way we produce it?
This might be a good time for the real Luke Lung, if he's in the room, to talk about the TM65 version that's being published for the US specifically, because for anyone who hasn't looked into TM65 at all, it's just taking the raw material amounts by percentage, and then you multiply it by the embodied carbon per raw material, and then you scale it up by the complexity of the equipment. So a version of that is being produced for the US specifically. The only tweak being those raw materials and the grid factors being taken into account. Otherwise, it's exactly the same. And that was just produced for Canada, I believe. So it's a direction that we seem to be going in globally. I don't know if the real Luke is in the room and wants to add to that.
Yeah, actually, most of the Luke in the room are better looking than me, so I'm the less better looking version of Luke. In terms of TM65, more in the line of X-ray has been discussing with SIPC about that. And it's gonna appear as an addendum in the original SIPC TM65 if that's gonna move forward. And similar to what Katie was talking about, it's gonna be quantifying the amount of material times the carbon emission factor. And that factor, we are working with several organizations, including Argonne National Lab, to provide the next generation of finer grain of that carbon emission so that we can get better accuracy. So more to come about that, but most likely we will see some action in the next 3 to 6 months. Thank you.
Thanks, Luke. I think another good point to bring up while we have, I saw that Vaslav was in the room from EC3. I know there's some work being done for MEP EPDs or EPD lights, whatever we're calling them, to be integrated into EC3 so that they are more accessible. So Vaslav, I don't know if you have any information about that you want to share. I don't think Louise Hamo is here to share any.
Yeah, that's right. So we've been working with Integral and a few other folks on, first of all, adding MEP categories into EC3. for any of the environmental product declarations that we currently have. And hopefully we have that environmental product declaration library growing in those MEP categories once that's rolled out. We are also adding what we will be calling the industry estimates, which will include some of the TM65 data that Integral has been collecting and that other people may be collecting for their projects as well. So we'll start inputting those non-EPD data points into the MEP categories as well in a couple of months.
Thanks for the update. All right, I think we will move on to the next working group, if that's okay with everyone, which is very similar in topic. So if you have any questions, you could just ask them there. So moving on to data analysis and reporting. This is myself and Kim Shin, who you heard from before. So the outline of our scope is across all 4 of the tenets of the challenge. So reporting progress being a very specific agreement for this group. So working with a DDX, that's something that Kim will talk about. We also are working on that low GWP of refrigerants, getting the industry to understand the impact of refrigerants very specifically. If you missed the first forum, we had a very elongated example of the impact that refrigerants can have. And then also looking at EPDs, not necessarily from the perspective of working with manufacturers as the last group was, but collating those EPDs and finding a method that makes sense. And I think through tools like EC3, it should make that much, much easier for MEP folks to access that information in a way that is democratized. Since right now we're leaning on a lot of global information because the US hasn't produced much. So we're going to give you a brief history of our meetings as a working group. So we started in April of this year. And during that first group, we just went over knowledge gathering, making sure that everyone was on the same page in terms of what is an EPD, what are some case studies we've seen, the topic of scaling EPDs, since that's very much related to the data. Do we do it by CFM for an air handling unit, or do you do it by kilowatts for an air handling unit, or do you do it by the mass? So understanding that briefly, and then also going through how TM65 method works, and then the refrigerant GWP impacts very specifically. And then we decided, because there's so much to cover from the perspectives of data analysis and reporting, there were 5 potential subgroups that came up for us. So refrigerants, reporting, EPD data sets, BIM formatting was very important. It might not seem completely related, but we'll talk about that in a bit. And then also the operational versus embodied impacts came up again from this perspective, because if we were able to find some really good case studies and share them with the group, that was important to us as well. So we had decided on the first 2 subgroups. Kim, I don't know if you want to come in for this slide and fill us in.
Sure. So as Kaylee said, we prioritized the reporting and refrigerant issues and put together a couple of subgroups that we call our action teams. And Kaylee and Corey Duggan headed up the refrigerant action team, while Ante Vulan from GluMac and I headed up the action reporting team. And I was the one that actually put together their acronyms. So I made Kaylee's group the rats and made us the arts. And she's vowed to never let me do that again. So that's really where we've been focusing our work and what we want to report on for this interval since we met back in March. For the action reporting team, it's really, we settled on, it's up to each signatory company to put together its company plan and what its interim goals are. Basically, the only thing that we're asking each signatory company to do is to actually have a written plan for how they're going to get to our ultimate goals. And we really encourage anybody that's got a plan to share it with everyone else in the community, as much to let people know what you're doing, but also to let people kind of understand what done looks like for that task. So we've actually posted some little 100-word synopses of different company plans and reporting methodologies up on our website in the resources section of MEP2040.org. It seems like a relatively large minority, about 40% of our signatories, are already members of AIA 2030 and are using their online reporting tool to do energy performance reporting. And one of the good news issues for anybody who's not a member of AIA 2030 is your firm, nor anyone in your firm, has to be a dues-paying member of AIA in order to join the AIA 2030 commitment and to have access and use of the DDX reporting tool. So I get the impression that many of the folks who are representing the firms that are signatories to our challenge are thinking, oh, you know, I don't want to pay somebody else to do this, you know, et cetera, et cetera. Well, it turns out that the barrier for being a member of the AIA 2030 commitment is exactly the same barrier to be an MEP 2040 challenge member. You got to have a company plan, you got to publish it, and you got to report on the DDX. That's how low the bar is. Now, if your firm is doing reporting that is independent of the DDX, don't stop doing that. We're not going to make you use the DDX to report with. But the good news is that reporting format already exists. And if you don't have a reporting format, it's easy enough for you to adopt that. And the good news is that the AIA 2030 commitment is really working with us, one of those partnerships again, to help sort of flesh out the embodied carbon and refrigerant impact parts of that reporting database. And I think that that's really great news, because the AIA is doing a good job of aggregating and reporting out that data so that we're getting a pretty good industry picture of what's going on year to year. So once again, we're not telling anybody that you have to use the DDX. What we are saying is that a fairly large number of us already use the DDX. It's there for your use if you want to. We're also in some discussions, and it's one of those rabbit holes that data obsessed engineers love to run down, is how to convert the energy performance information that we're already, most of us, doing, especially from our energy modeling work, as well as post-occupancy actual performance data, that most of that is energy performance data. And we're talking about the methodology to get from energy to carbon. And what we've sort of come down on is we want each of our signatory firms to take responsibility for doing that conversion as best they see fit. If you think it's best for you to do hour by hour information out of a tool like Cambium or WattTime, do that. If you think it's okay to use eGrid, carbon emission factors to do that conversion, do that. Just reveal what methodology you're using to get from energy performance to carbon. That's all we're asking for, is transparency about where those carbon numbers came from. Now, it turns out that some online tools like the DDX and Energy Star are already have some carbon emission factors built into them. And if you are using those tools, then you've sort of made the decision about how you want to report that. Once again, I hate to sound like a shill for the AIA 2030 DDX, but it's sort of, it makes it less painful for you to have to come up with those numbers. So that's what's been happening in the past with the arts. Kaylee, let's hear what's going on with the rats.
The rats, my favorite topic. So during the first forum, we had revealed an alpha version of a tool that was going to help us assess the amount of leakage from refrigerant-based equipment based on the type of equipment and the amount of charge that you would have, which goes hand in hand with what we would report, right? You would report the type of equipment, the charge of the equipment. We're still sorting through what those details might be if it's integrated into the AIA DDX. So what the RAT group did was go through all of the sources on leakage rates, equipment lifespan, the GWP rates for each of the different types of refrigerant. So those are the three primary data sets that the calculation is accessing. What we did was give the whole swath of every data set we could find. So there's information in there from the EPA, from CIBSE, from ASHRAE, CIBDTM 65 to be a little bit more specific as well. So you'll find lots of different data sets in there. And this diagram that you see on the right side is a VRF versus a chiller in the leakage rate amounts per each different guiding body for that information. So you'll see that that leakage rate varies drastically across those different data sets, but whatever region you sit in is probably the data set that you'll trust. So in the US, we tend to trust things from ASHRAE. In the UK, they would tend to trust things from CIBSE. So bias involved, you'll get different results. But those are the numbers that we go to for those leakage rates anyway. So I know that came up in the last forums call where people were like, that doesn't sound right. That's not the right amount of leakage rate. You'd have to get that number from somewhere, right? So we provided all of those. So we compared those, looked over the documentation together, and then leading into our last meeting that we had last week, we gave updates on that from the refrigerant group. That tool will be available for alpha testing probably toward the end of June. Sorry that it's taken a little bit of time for that to be released. And then also something that we thought was important. So in Europe and the UK, the Montreal Protocol accepted an amendment called the Kigali Amendment that mandated the switch to low GWP refrigerants. The US chose not to accept that amendment. So that's why we've probably seen less progress from manufacturers in the US because they're not formally being pressured into using low GWP refrigerants. Corey did a great study across a bunch of different manufacturers on why they're not using 1234ZE and what the cost difference is maybe, or in the performance difference between using different refrigerants. So hopefully that's something we can share in the next forum. Just from the manufacturer's perspective. And that's, again, another crossover with the manufacturers and EPD's group. But that was something that we wanted to bring to the attention of this group is why we're not moving toward lower GWP refrigerants. But just wanted to make sure that was shared with everyone. Kim, you already went over your proposal to AIA DDX for reporting. So we're in contact with Charlotte Driesen, and then also Corey Duggan sits on the AIA DDX committee. So in a good place for that. Then during the last group, we also decided on our second priority groups. So we've broken into two parts with the BIM protocols for MEP systems and carbon tracking, or sorry, for carbon tracking, and then operational versus embodied impacts. Just to elaborate again on what the BIM protocols is. So if you have ever embarked on an MEP embodied carbon study, you will know that there's a lot to be desired from our Revit models. You would have had to label all of your systems. We're usually pretty lazy about stating the material that was utilized. So for your sprinkler piping, was it carbon steel? For your domestic piping? Was it PVC? Was it copper? Those things matter, but sometimes people don't put those in the model. Did you put insulation against all of your systems where it should have been? So answering this kind of tick list of questions, just to give people some guidance, it's a lot easier to measure your embodied carbon if all those things are in there. So coming up with a list of best tips and tricks. Structural folks have gone through this over the last number of years in terms of stating the type of concrete that you're utilizing or if it has rebar. So the same thing happened in that group. We figured that the DAR group would take on that topic as well. And then also the topic of operational versus embodied impacts.
And as you can see, the RATS action team has been going through a maze of searching for cheese in one corner or another. So I think they're rather aptly named.
So glad you're defending that.
And as we were talking about in the last group, the operational and embodied impacts folks are really starting to scour the industry for what do we have already for case studies that give us some picture into what these mechanical LCAs look like and some of the information that's coming out of them. And it is an emerging field. Every project is unique. I don't think we've discovered anything that comes close to being an industry rule of thumb that's dependable. It matters where the project is. It matters what the project energy use profile looks like. It matters where stuff is sourced from. It crosses over between disciplines, like is the embodied carbon in wall insulation worth the reduction in operational carbon? Is the positioning of heavy mechanical equipment up above grade justified in the increase in embodied carbon in the structural system associated with holding up that equipment? There are literally hundreds, if not millions, of strands that can be pulled on. And one of the things that we're going to be doing is looking at those studies, seeing if there's some truths that are not readily evident to us and sort of bringing those out. On the subject of energy using equipment, one of the sort of weird conundrums is that energy using equipment tends to be inversely proportional in terms of weight to operating efficiency, so that we can see that like a more efficient chiller is going to have more copper in its tube bundle. Well, the copper of that embodied carbon is inversely proportional to the amount of operational carbon that's being generated by the use of that machine. So there are a lot of nuances. There are a lot of pluses and minuses, and I don't want to dampen your enthusiasm for this, but we may, in our literature search, in our investigations, find out that we have completely conflicting directions coming out of two different case studies. But that's the work that we're doing on that.
There's a lot of good conversation going on in the chat about the Kigali Amendment and that the AIM Act is mirroring the Kigali schedule. So I don't know if David or Nanette wants to add some additional color to this. I just flashed up the article on screen.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add other than what's here. Maybe Nanette, being from Train, has more to add in terms of what they're doing to address it, but
Nanette, you may be muted if you're speaking. Nope, maybe nothing to add. So we will update links to information like this on the MEP 2040 site. So great that you've added this into the conversation. Thank you. Does anyone else have information? I saw some questions about the sense for the embodied carbon of components like piping and ductwork versus the whole system. That's something that we can work on through the data analysis and reporting group as well. I've done some preliminary studies on different piping materials versus each other, but not necessarily on a whole building scale, and being able to compare that to structures or MEP as a whole would be very useful.
And once again, it tends to be really characterized by system type selection, building type, building size. There are so many different variables that it's at least at this point in our knowledge, we don't have any real indicators to tell us what to look for this building size, this system type, or this building type. It's still very much a work in progress.
So someone
see anything else coming up in the chat?
Yeah,
So
I see that Kel had asked, are we making allowances theoretically for systems that are not modeled, or the fact that we don't model pipe less than 2 inches? Things like that will probably end up being some kind of delta for us. But that's something I think we should think about in our BIM protocol space, is what's not modeled. We don't model any of the hangers for systems, right? Unless you're crazy and go to LOD 350. People do that.
and actually, this is one of the places that our contracting brethren and sisterin can really help us. And I see that Thomas from Excel is actually in the chat saying, yeah, we, in taking off our bill of materials, we have some factors that we use for that. So gathering that information is really going to be helpful for us in helping us on the design side sort of get our actual closer to our estimates before we actually turn our product over to the contractors for them to buy it out. We need to be able to do that during design to make our LCA analysis. We can't wait until the job is bought out and all the system decisions have been made to help make those decisions. So it's an important thing that we need to find out from talking with our contractor colleagues. And we definitely want you to join the DAR working group. If you're at all interested in these ideas and you've got some experience, or you just have an avid curiosity for doing the research that we need to do, we need you to come on board with us. We are, even as we speak, going to be starting a collaboration and communication between DAR and EPD, particularly around where things like the information that we gather, where's it going to live, how's it going to be accessible, what's a format for an LCA study going to look like, how and where we use TM65 versus full-fledged EPDs. All of that is going to be part of the conversation between the DAR and the EPD working groups.
Again, feel free to throw your email address into the chat if you would like to join the group. We're going to go ahead and move on to the partnerships group, which Stefan and Luke will be covering. The real Luke.
Let's see how many Lukes there are today.
Let's gather all the Lukes together.
There can never be enough. So hello, everyone. And you're going to hear some repetition, I think, of some themes here. That's probably not too unexpected. But the way in which the partnership group sort of relates to the 4 elements of the commitment is sort of, looking to benefit from existing examples of similar strategies within the design and building industry. So the relationship to company plans that address other topics, I think, is somewhat relevant to this group, and then also contributing to the body of knowledge, and then perhaps being serving as a through line into these other working groups when there's greater detail involved. If you go to the next slide, here is sort of the origin story for this group, and that is that the steering committee began by identifying all what we, I guess, understood as the carbon chain of custody organizations and entities that were probably at work on this topic already, and some in relationship, but others perhaps alone, and that we wanted to make sure that we sort of understood the ecosystem and tried to tie into it as best we could, and perhaps even establish relationships between folks that didn't realize that they should have a relationship. And for those of you on the call, you probably belong to one or several of these groups. Next slide, please. So these are the sort of stakeholder types that we identified, and we've probably missed some, and I know there are different terms that one could use here as well, but it's interesting because each one sort of represents a silo, I guess, in terms of an approach toward a topic that may be common to everyone else, and it also depends upon relationships, multiple or specific relationships. Next slide, please. I attempted to map this across the sort of carbon accounting framework, and this is just a sketch. Please excuse this. This is not intended to be accurate, but it sort of helped me understand that we're probably coming at this from different perspectives, and sometimes we follow others. For example, policy is emerging in some places that is going to begin to drive demand, and the response rates then are ultimately very critical. But establishing relationships around common goals is obviously important, though sometimes things then even require MOUs if there are specific efforts involved. And folks have already talked about the importance of connecting the design community to the manufacturing community and looking for drivers. Next slide, please. The driver is usually the owner or the entity that has a significant procurement presence in the industry. I learned from Corey, one of our attendees in our group sessions, about Turner's Source Blue program and their ability to really sort of partner with manufacturers way upstream in terms of serving the various clients that they have, and exerting influence that smaller outfits might not be able to do. But they were very willing to share this information as one example. There's also ESG pressure that's emerging from the SEC regulations, where suddenly the finance industry is going to be paying much more attention to this and applying greater pressure to projects. Thanks. And putting this all into perspective, not only in terms of the embodied carbon relationships that we were just talking about between not only embodied and operational carbon, but also impact on other building systems, I think that most of us are probably also thinking of other goals that we're trying to achieve. In other words, embodied carbon might also be a silo of its own, and there are some ways in which to sort of evaluate it among other impact categories. Next slide, please. So these are some examples of things that are exciting and underway in part. You've already heard from Kim about the reporting that's going on between the trifecta in terms of the well-integrated design team, AIA, MEP, and the structural engineering commitments. That's all sort of finding its way into the GDX, which is fantastic. There's a really great carbon action plan that's emerged under the umbrella of the CLF through buildingtransparency.org. I'm not sure if anyone is on the call today from this group, but the owners can. Action plan, which is on the next slide, sort of illustrates an opportunity for MEP to slip right into the way in which owners can begin to implement some of the things that we're all working on. And thirdly, the mindful materials framework is something that's made great strides and is being adopted by the AIA and is going to be rolling out a new framework, but this is something that actually aligns with some of the commitments that owners and designers and builders and manufacturers have made to look at their products, not just through embodied carbon, but also through 4 other buckets. So a total of 5. Next slide, please. So if you can see this slide, this is page 1 from a very long flip book that really helps walk you through an action plan from an owner's perspective. In pink here, there's the architect column, and adjacent to that is the structural engineer. I would love to see how the mechanical engineering community might find its way into this as well, and this might already be underway. But that's something that we think would be an important piece of the collaboration that's going on. And this is what's about to be announced at the AIA in 2 weeks, and then further rolled out in a version 1.0, which is the Common Materials Framework. Annie Brevin from Mindful Materials tells me that any product from any spec category can be filtered here through this framework. Embodied carbon is just one element, but so are sort of climate action plans by the companies behind that particular product and other impact categories. All of that can be input into this system and shared via the database that grows. Next slide. So that's an overview of the things that this group has been talking about. And we'd like to continue to get more signatories and supporters. We'd like to, I don't know, what's the right amount of percentage increase before the next quarterly session. We'd like to, improve on that. There's already activity going on in terms of upcoming conferences. I'm not sure about presentations yet, but that's the type of thing that I hope this group is definitely working on. And so we're looking for those opportunities. And then of course we want to continue to collaborate and coordinate with the other groups. And I will admit that I'd love some help in leading this group. I was late in scheduling our working sessions, but there were some really wonderful and strong voices in our session that we did have. Yeah, we're looking forward to having more meetings, including a presentation by Annie Brevin from the Mindful Materials program in mid-July. That is my last slide.
Does anyone have questions on partnerships or ideas for additional partnerships we should be targeting for MEP 2040?
Kaylee, I put a comment in earlier, but one partnership opportunity that I know that DOE has a working group within the Better Buildings Challenge and Better Climate Challenge groups that are focused on embodied carbon. They're releasing an embodied carbon sort of workflow that should be the final draft, I think, came out for internal review this week or last week. But they might be a good partnership to connect with, because they might be a funding opportunity in terms of any sort of research that we think is needed to help fill out data sets or to get a broader understanding of some of the impact. Embodied carbon hasn't traditionally been a big focus of DOE, but they're kind of pivoting to sort of pull that under their wing as well. So I feel like it might be a really great opportunity, and I can help make the introductions to the folks that are in that working group if you guys are interested.
Yes, please. Green light. I see another comment in the chat for Green Light Alliance.
I think the most recent chat is going back to the cradle to grave versus cradle to gate impacts. If we're happy to move on from partnerships, we'll go ahead and move on to communications and resources. It's like Kimberly just added in New Buildings Institute as being a target as well. right, Rob or Andrew?
Terrific. So we get to bat cleanup here. Let me kind of start out by saying that, Kim, I don't think the communications working group has had a chance to vet the RAT and ART acronyms.
Please do.
So yeah, I'm sure Kaylee, you're probably advocating for that. Can we get somebody else to maybe help us with the, the branding, naming? But anyway.
Hey, don't poke the bear. I can come up with some acronyms for you guys too.
Yes, we know that. Turnabout is fair play. Yes. Okay, so a quick overview of the Communications and Resources Working Group. You obviously got a sneak preview of what has just launched today with the website. That's been a sort of primary activity. But similar to the other working groups, we have our particular pieces. We do touch on all of the 4 pillars, but have particular activity around how we are sharing and publishing others information about establishing a company plan. We play a big role, obviously, in helping to facilitate the MEP 2040 forum and all of our signatories contributing to the growing body of knowledge. There's a lot of cross collaboration that we have with the other working groups as well. And I don't know that anybody has sort of mentioned it on this particular call, but we did talk about it in the first forum, this notion of the cross collaboration with what we've kind of termed ambassadors. So we actually do have a couple of folks within our communication working group that actually sit in the meetings of the other working groups so that we've got closer communication in terms of what's going on. We've been quite active in terms of our meetings to date. We're working on a bi-weekly basis with our core team members. Myself, Andrew Himes, and Caitlin Sanon are the tri-chairs. And then beyond the core team members that are listed here, there's a number of you that are actually participating in the forum who have participated in some of the sessions that we've had. So we appreciate that ongoing participation. Next slide, please. In terms of some of the outreach that you may have seen for us, sort of the first action was really a social media campaign and outreach toolkit. So those of you who are signatories should have received an email outreach linking you to various different tools available as you're announcing your participation within the MEP 2040 community, and then also some sample language for what a posting might look like, whether it's on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, what have you, to really kind of help maintain some level of consistency and common messaging from the signatories, but with the ability actually to do a little bit of fine tuning specific to your own individual organizations. If you have not received this or are a recent signatory and have not received this, then please definitely reach out to us. We'll make sure that you've got access to this information. So before Andrew announced this morning that we'd gone live, we had a couple of snapshots that we thought we would drop in here because we weren't exactly sure if we were going live. So this is a little bit of redundant and repeated information that was shared with the very quick look earlier today at the live website. So MEP2040.org. There's a number of different things that we have actually within the website. We definitely want to encourage everybody to go to it. As Andrew mentioned this morning, we are working on a template with some background information for those of you who are signatories who have what you feel is relevant content to share, to be posted to our resources page to fill in. So we want to make sure that we've got that available to everybody, and that again, we've got a level of consistency in process that we're following. I guess the other thing to say with regard to incoming content for publishing on the website as a resource, there is an working group team that will be engaged just to quickly review for technical rigor. Want to make sure that we've got a rigorous process in terms of reviewing before we post the resource content that we're not necessarily working on internally as part of the MEP 2040 community to date, that information is being reviewed before it's being shared out to the wider community. Next slide. A couple of more screen sorry. Yeah, thank you. There were a couple of more screen grabs, which we can kind of quickly pass over. Again, encouraging everybody to go to the website, have a look around. There's a lot of great information, and certainly any suggestions for things that we have not captured, because nothing is ever final, right? Everything's a work in progress, and we want this to be as functional and usable and flexible and interactive enough for our signatory and supporter community. Okay, so like Kim had mentioned, right, this sort of idea of upcoming events and outreach is something that I think we have tasked within our group, and you'll see it on the next slide as well. You know, how we can better sort of identify folks within the community that have speaking engagements and who are speaking on or representing MEP 2040 at various different conferences. There's some upcoming events where we've got some folks who either steering committee members or signatories who are participating or presenting at various different conferences. There's a Passive House conference coming up in I guess it's tomorrow and next Friday online that Julie Janiski is I believe going to be presenting some information at, and she's bringing a little bit of information about what we're doing at MEP 2040 to the table. The ASHRAE annual conference, June 25th through the 29th in Toronto. There's some activity and representation around MEP 2040 that is going to be at that. And then Greenbuild, November 1st through the 3rd, coming up in San Francisco. We have an interaction with CLF and with, I think it's a table with building transparency that we're able to share, right? Andrew, you've got a little bit more detail around this. Anyway, we're sharing a table with building transparency. There will be a number of events, and many of us who will actually be at Greenbuild in San Francisco and participating and sharing information about our movement here.
Sorry, I was muted earlier, Rob, so I left you hanging there. But yes, building transparency has acquired I think it's a 10 by 10 booth at Greenbuild and has invited CLF to share their space, and that'll be a place where MEP 2040 folks can come to meet and chat and connect with each other. And there will also be a party that Stacy and folks from CLF are organizing together.
Okay, next and final slide, Kaylee. Okay, so some of the work to come, and I would like to take just a second to thank all of those on the Communications and Resources Subcommittee. There actually has been quite a lot of effort since the first forum putting this together, and we're trying to stay in as close a contact as possible with the DAR working group, with the partnership working group, with the EPD working group, so that information that is being generated, we're the conduit, right, to sharing that, communicating that, finding a home for those resources, so that we have that kind of one-stop shop with respect to where all of you as our signatories and supporters have access. Mm-hmm. The work to come conference subcommittee needed, subcommittee subgroup, working with Stefan and the partnership group, how we can kind of come together and create a group that's actually a subgroup to really kind of focus on this, so that we're generating speaking opportunities and presentation opportunities and being more active rather than passive with regard to what we are doing as part of the MEP 2040 commitment. And then an advocacy subcommittee. We've talked about this from our first working group meeting, and I think that this is something that we're hoping to accelerate now. There was mention, earlier in this call, some movement with regard to governmental interrelationships of, kind of moving the needle on advocacy related items. And we have some folks within the communications subgroup that are very actively interested in this. And so we're kind of itching to get that going sooner now. So I think after today's forum, we'll look to push that forward. So for both of these subcommittees and the larger communication and resources working group, we are still looking for folks to participate. And if it's not you, if you're specifically a technical person at your firm, but you have access to communications and marketing resources that you could make available to us to help move the needle forward even faster, please do not hesitate. If you can, connect us, we would love that. Absolutely love that. And why not C and R?
Do you have any questions for Rob or Andrew?
I just have a couple of really quick things to add to what Rob said, and I'll share my screen as well so that you can see what I'm looking at. So first of all, as Rob mentioned, we're in the process of setting up a process for people to submit resources to the, I think I shared the wrong thing. Hold on just a second here. Try that one more time. All right, so this is the, do you all see my my screen with the MEP 2040 website there? Great, okay, so we're setting up a process for people to be able to share resources that they've developed. Typically, this is going to be a resource that's located on a publicly available location, such as your website or a Dropbox, Google Drive, or OneDrive that we can link to, and a process for people to, for the MEP 2040 team to review and vet, and then make decisions about publication for those resources. And so very specifically, we're going to be having anybody who'd want to join this little team would be really welcome. We want to have a team, kind of a publications team that's focused on both reviewing, vetting, and then actually publishing using our new web publishing platform, which is very easy to use. It's Squarespace, if anybody knows about that. And then finally, I just wanted to point out that there is an online community. The CLF community has a focus group on MEP 2040, and folks are joining that group, and the conversation is starting up. And so post content of your own comments or suggestions or links, and discussion of critical questions, and then comment on others as well. We want to really encourage the development of a lively and vibrant conversation. And that's it, I think. Any questions of Rob or me about communications? And if not, we can move on.
I see in the chat that there are a number of people who are looking for the media kits and to be added to the communications and resources working group. So it looks like you guys had a good impact on the community.
Oh, good.
Yeah, we'll make sure that we've got that media toolkit available as a resource, I think, on the website. I think Andrew will have to kind of figure out how to, it's obviously very closely tied to our signatories and supporters. So there
Right.
may be a little bit of additional security around that, right?
What we can do immediately is send out another email to everybody on this call and other folks who have signed up to be signatories or supporters with the media kit, with the attachments in it, to make sure that all of you have it. And we'd welcome and encourage people to use that to spread the word on, especially on places like LinkedIn and other social media and other places that you think your friends, partners, comrades, and customers will be.
On sort of the related topic of conferences, we have a note in the chat about, is there a meeting organized at the upcoming ASHRAE conference in Toronto on MEP 2040 challenge?
I think that's a good question. I don't know that there's a specific meeting around that. Kaylee, was there somebody from the steering committee who was presenting?
Not that I'm aware of. We do have a presentation in for the Building Decarbonization Conference that ASHRAE is hosting in October.
Okay.
Is that the one in Greece?
Yes.
That was me sighing.
Kim, you are welcome to do the presentation.
No, that's fine. Katie, did we have time to circle back to the manufacturers and EPD group? We've been joined by Bill McQuaid, our friend from AHRI, and I know there was some discussion that came up around AHRI. So hopefully we've got a couple of seconds that we could at least revisit that conversation.
Sure. Bill, if there's anything you'd like to add.
Yeah, I can't see from the chat what was talked about previously, because I joined later, and I apologize. I had an ASHRAE meeting that I was on. But we just had our spring meeting in Washington D.C. last week, and we did. Decarbonization is obviously a big discussion with our members. Not only in terms of things like electrification, but also how do we prepare for providing the kind of information that you all need as you develop decarbonized buildings. And certainly EPDs are a big part of that, and providing the kind of information that goes into an EPD from a manufacturing standpoint is pretty daunting when you look at the kind of detail. If you want to do a full EN 15 series kind of EPD, and we're not set up to do that. That's very cost intensive today, but it doesn't mean that we can't take steps toward that over time. And I do like what like the CIBC TM65 has done, where they have maybe a limited amount of information initially to help kind of get the discussion started, and then as we build capability and consistency in the type of data required, that's something that we could do over time. We have, if you look at the way a lot of the product portfolios are structured within a lot of the companies, there's mixing and matching of coils on split systems, whether they're residential unitary small or commercial unitary large, and you can have a single manufacturer have tens of thousands of product SKUs depending on the options that you choose. And even in terms of like a chiller with standard options and other options that you can get on those, that can easily run up into the tens of thousands. So if we had individual EPDs that are certified by third party thing, that's a pretty daunting kind of step to expect to do overnight. But if it's something where we can kind of, if we look at it as a journey over time, where we can maybe get EPDs for categories of products that are relatively similar, and maybe do that as a group of manufacturers doing that have similar processes and things like that, there might be a pathway to get there. But I don't, there certainly is an opposition to providing that information. It's just something that the economics have to make sense. It can't be something that's so cost intensive and so resource intensive that we can't do anything else, because of course the DOE is pushing for improvements in energy efficiency, and we have the refrigerant transition that's happening all at once, and those all take development resources also to do that. So I don't know if that's the kind of feedback you wanted to get. There's certainly, it has our attention, especially as we get more requests for it as an industry, and we would look to try to do something in a standardized and practical manner, with the expectation that we get more detailed over time.
Yeah, Bill, this is Adam. So Christy and I we've spoken to you before on this, and Christy's kind of spearheading that end of it. Yeah, one of our goals, as we talked about earlier, is hopefully towards the later part of this year that we can at least start to communicate out what we might want from manufacturers and what kind of a timeline might be reasonable. Because we have engineers that want to start specifying this. We're going to start pounding manufacturers for requests for some kind of information, right? And owners that want to put a little bit more to their own project requirements in a reasonable way that gets them moving forward on that as well. So whether we group different products under EPD or SIPC or TM65 approach, or everything starts with TM65 first, and then we introduce that timeline. Ideally, that's something we'd like to be able to publish towards the end of this year. And I think it's going to take a lot of different voices to have that make sense. And we're scheduling some dedicated forums with manufacturers and owners just to have that discussion. So I do think if it's possible, if there is someone from your group that might be able to participate in our working group to help inform that as well, because getting communication through HRI would be pretty powerful as well, just so we're all saying the same thing. So I think it feels like that's the point that we're at. And I don't know if this fall to get a timeline out there is reasonable or not, but it feels like it would be nice to be able to communicate something that most people agree on. So that's kind of where
I think that's so key to getting something useful done in a short period of time. Because if we get a million different requests, all with different levels of information, that makes it almost impossible for companies to handle that. But if it's something where we can, maybe agree upon certain products to begin with and a certain amount of data done in a standardized way, then it's much easier for the manufacturers to respond to the market need. And that's really what it's all about, right? If the customers are asking for it, then we can get it together. It's just that it can't be bits and drabs and dribbles here and there, and then expect that they're going to commit a lot of resources to it if it's not kind of a full shift in the industry. So I think, yeah, the answer is yes, we would want to participate in that. I think it's it's good to kind of get manufacturers together and agree upon, even if it's what format it comes out, is it something that's printed out on a rating whenever you get performance data, or is it something that comes separately as a sheet, or how you want to see it. But certainly I think there's an opportunity to do this, and they are, depending on the market, over in Europe there is already some of that going on. So I think it's certainly doable.
Yeah, others on the steering committee, I don't want to get ahead on that topic because my knowledge is limited too. So others on the steering committee, what are your thoughts on that timeline and that approach?
Yeah, we have been talking about this in ASHRAE also. I run a subcommittee of the task force for building decarbonization that's looking at appliance and equipment standards. And You know, one thing that's important when you're trying to prioritize these things is to look at the sensitivity of certain values relative to you know, the system or the building as a whole. You know, and while we're still fossil fuel intensive in the grid, you know, with the embodied carbon piece, you know, certain aspects of that, where you're sourcing your aluminum, copper, things like that may be noise at this point. But as we get further down the road to a green grid and we transitioned away from high GWP refrigerants, then that stuff becomes a lot more important. So you know, it's something where we're taking a look at doing sensitivity analysis and understanding you know, the relative uncertainty within an EPD and how much of that really matters if you're trying to make product decisions based upon an EPD, but the uncertainty is overlapping maybe two different technologies or the same technology from two different you know, providers, then you need to know that. And even though there's requirements in 15804 for uncertainty to be published with an EPD, I'm not aware of any that have actually done that. So, you know, when I look at the different providers of EPDs or the certifiers of EPDs, I don't see any uncertainty on those. So anyways, that's something I think you need to keep in mind as the building design professionals of you know, how much weight are you putting into some of the information that you're getting relative to technologies or you know, just comparison of the same technology in different providers.